Sometimes the love you think will save you is the same love that nearly sends you to your grave. Imagine just days after your beautiful wedding, your husband transforms into a walking nightmare. Good morning, my dears. This is Grandma Betty, with my 73 years of life experience, sharing a story today that I've kept hidden in the depths of my heart for almost 5 decades. I'm sitting here on my porch in Portland, Oregon, enjoying my coffee and blueberry muffin while the birds sing in the maple trees in my backyard. It was here, in this same Oregon with its many rivers and mysteries, that I experienced the greatest pain and transformation of my life. Before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to share a little secret with all of you. The team at this channel is doing a new $500 giveaway just for those watching this video. Participating is very easy. Just subscribe to this channel, hit the notification bell, give this video a thumbs up, and comment with something interesting about yourself, like which city you were born in or live in, how many children or grandchildren you have. It can really be anything about yourself. I'm super excited to read them. Let's go back to 1968, when I was just 16 years old. Portland was already an important city, but still quite different from what it is today. Many streets were unpaved. Electricity was a luxury not everyone had, and we entertained ourselves at church festivals and square dances that happened in the town square on Sundays. It was at one of these dances that I met Frank. Oh, my children. Frank back then was a young man who took the breath away from any girl. Tall, strong from working at the lumber mill, tanned skin, a smile that showed all his white and perfect teeth. When he asked me to dance that night, I felt my heart race like never before. A pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone, he told me. And naive as I was, I believed that was special, that it was just for me. Little did I know that Frank said this to everyone. In those days, dating was different. It had to be with parents' permission, with the living room door open, sitting on the sofa with a respectable distance between bodies. My father, Mr. Gerald, was a fisherman, a strict man who had raised 6 daughters alone after my mother died of fever when I was only 8 years old. He didn't like it at all when Frank showed up asking to date me. "That boy has the eyes of someone who's no good," he told me one night. "Eyes that shine too bright, hide a lot of shadows behind them. But who listens to a father's advice when the heart is in love?" I insisted so much that he eventually allowed the relationship, but with 1,000 recommendations and a watchful eye on every move. Frank was hard-working. No one could deny that. He had a steady job as an office assistant at a large lumber company that exported to the southern states. He earned reasonably well, dressed neatly, always smelling of cheap but well-applied cologne. And he treated me like a princess. Flowers picked along the way, colorful ribbons for my hair, promises of a future that seemed as bright as the Willamette River on a sunny day. 6 months after we started dating, he asked for my hand in marriage. I remember my father sitting in the rocking chair on the porch, pipe in the corner of his mouth, listening to Frank's request with an expression that mixed distrust and resignation. "Will you take good care of my daughter?" my father asked, his eyes fixed on Frank's. "I'll make her the happiest woman in Oregon, Mr. Gerald." A man's word. And then came the preparations. Simple wedding, because neither I nor my family could afford anything big. The ceremony was in the little St. Sebastian's Church, followed by a celebration in my father's backyard with barbecue, beer for the men, soda for the women, and a 3-tier cake that my sisters made with so much love that I still remember the taste. We went to live in a small rented house near the mill. Just 2 rooms, a living room that also served as a kitchen and a bedroom. The bathroom was outside, a small wooden cabin with a pit in the ground. But to me, it was a palace, because I was with the man I loved, building our future. The first weeks of marriage were like a dream. Frank left early for work, returned in the late afternoon, always bringing me something small, a different fruit, a piece of candy, a new ribbon for my hair. The night was just ours, discovering the mysteries of that love which, in my innocence, I thought would last forever. It was like this, in one of these moments of passion, that I became pregnant. It wasn't even 2 months after getting married. When my period was late, I already suspected. I told my older sister Sarah, who took me to a respected midwife in town. "This belly already has life, my child. confirmed Mrs. Ruth after examining me with her experienced hands. You'll be a mother before the year ends. The joy I felt at that moment is difficult to explain to you. It was as if something inside me was complete, as if all the love I had to give finally found its true destination. I already imagined what the little face would look like, whether it would take after me or the father more, what name we would give. That night, I prepared a special dinner to tell Frank the news. I made his favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes, set the table with the best things in the house, even put a flower in a glass as decoration. When he arrived, he immediately noticed something was different. What's this celebration, Betty? Are we celebrating something I don't know about? We are, I replied, barely containing my happiness. We're going to be parents, Frank. There's a baby growing in here. His reaction that night seemed everything I could wish for. His eyes sparkled. He hugged me tight, spun me around the small room, made 1,000 plans out loud. How he would be the best father in the world, how he would work twice as hard to give everything to our child, how he would build a crib with his own hands. It's going to be a boy, he said with certainty. A strong lad like his father to help me in life. The first months of pregnancy were smooth. I had normal morning sickness, that weakness in the body, a sleep that never ended. Frank remained attentive, asked how I was feeling, brought the fruits I craved. On weekends, we would walk by the river, making plans, choosing names. If it's a boy, he'll be called Frank Jr., he insisted. And if it's a girl, I would ask. It won't be a girl, he would reply, frowning. I'm certain it's a boy. My father and sisters visited often, bringing gifts for the baby, hand-sewn clothes, a crocheted bootie, a patchwork blanket. My belly grew beautifully, round, and I spent hours talking to that little life forming inside me. I told stories, sang lullabies I remembered from my mother, made promises of eternal love. It was around the 4th month that I began to notice the first changes in Frank. Small things at first, a delay here, an excuse there. The different smell when he returned from work, a lipstick mark on his shirt collar that he swore was pen ink. I'm having to work overtime, he explained when he arrived late. The lumber mill has a lot of orders, a lot of documents to organize. I believed, or pretended to believe. After all, he was working for our future, for the comfort of our child on the way. And besides, what pregnant woman wants to see betrayal knocking at the door? By the 5th month, the changes became impossible to ignore. Frank was arriving later and later, sometimes not even coming home, saying he had fallen asleep at the office from exhaustion. The money that used to have a little left over now barely covered the basics. And that attention, that affection from the first months? It evaporated like dew in the strong morning sun. You're different with me, I risked saying one night, when he arrived almost at dawn. Is something wrong? What nonsense, woman. It's the pregnancy making you suspicious. I'm just working double to support this growing family. My belly was quite visible by then. I could feel the baby's movements, those little kicks that are like messages of love straight from heaven. But I also felt something heavier growing inside me. Distrust, fear, a sadness I couldn't name. I began to have health problems. My blood pressure would suddenly rise. I had headaches that wouldn't go away with anything, swelling in my feet and hands that worried the midwife during monthly consultations. This is pregnancy-induced high blood pressure, my child, explained Mrs. Ruth. It can be dangerous if not cared for. You need to rest more, avoid salt, and most importantly, avoid worry. Avoid worry. How, if my husband increasingly seemed like a stranger in my house? How, if suspicions grew along with my belly? My sister Sarah, who was always the most observant in the family, began to bring me warnings. Betty, people are talking about seeing Frank with a woman over by the sawmill. They say it's one who works in the office with him. I denied it, defended my husband, said they were gossips from people jealous of our happiness. But deep down, well deep down, I knew there was truth in those rumors. I felt it in the heavy air that Frank brought when he entered the house, saw it in the eyes that no longer looked at me properly, noticed it in the body that moved away from mine in bed. It was when I completed 6 months of pregnancy that the worst happened. Frank didn't come home on a Friday, or on Saturday, or on Sunday. An entire week without news, without a message, without anything. I, desperate, with my already large belly, went to the lumber mill every day to ask about him. He asked for a few days off, was what they told me. Said he had a sick relative in the countryside. Sick relative? What relative, if his entire family lived right there in Portland? The lie was so poorly told that it hurt twice as much. It was my father who took me in that week. He took me back to the house where I grew up, put me in my old bed, took care of me like when I was little. My sisters took turns keeping me company, trying to distract me, cheer me up, prepare me for what seemed inevitable. "You're strong, my daughter," my father would say as he smoked his pipe on the porch. "You'll raise this grandchild of mine with or without that good-for-nothing." And then, on the morning of the 8th day, Frank appeared at my father's door. He looked worn out, with dark circles under his eyes, unshaven. He asked to speak to me alone. My father was reluctant, but eventually allowed it. "Where were you?" I asked, as soon as we were alone in the backyard. "Working, woman. I had to go to Seattle to resolve some lumber mill business." The lie came so easily from his mouth that I almost believed it. Almost. But something had changed in me during that week of abandonment. A strength I didn't know I had began to manifest. "Don't lie to me, Frank. I know it wasn't for work. The lumber mill said you asked for time off." He hesitated, ran his hand through his disheveled hair, looked away. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh. "All right, I went to take care of some personal matters, but now I'm back, and I want you to come home. It doesn't look right for a married woman to be at her father's house." I went back. What choice did I have? I was in my 7th month of pregnancy, without work, without my own money, in a time when a separated woman was seen as a failure. And despite everything, there was still a stubborn flame of hope inside me that everything could go back to how it was before. But nothing went back. Frank now barely disguised his comings and goings, his disappearances. The monthly money came increasingly short, and I, with my heavy belly and even heavier heart, tried to keep the house running, prepare the baby's layette with the few resources I had, believed that when the child was born, the father would return to being the man I fell in love with. It was at the beginning of the 8th month that I discovered the whole truth. Not from him, who would never have the courage to tell me, but from Mrs. Josephine, a neighbor who worked cleaning the lumber mill. "My child," she told me one afternoon, with that look of pity that I learned to hate. "I need to tell you something, because I can't stand to see you suffering without knowing. Your husband is having an affair with the new secretary at the lumber mill, some Marlene who came from Seattle. Everyone there knows. They even say she's waiting for him to leave you after the baby is born." The world stopped at that instant. Even though I already suspected, even though I already felt in the air that something was very wrong, hearing the truth said like that, clear and raw, was like taking a shot to the chest. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my belly, leaning against the wall to keep from falling, seeing black spots dancing in front of me. But I didn't fall. I didn't faint. I didn't scream or cry. Something inside me closed, like a door slamming shut during a storm. I thanked Mrs. Josephine for the courage to tell me, went into the house, sat in the rocking chair, and stayed there, in silence, caressing my belly, thinking about what I would do next. That same night, when Frank arrived, miraculously early by the standards of recent weeks, he found dinner ready on the table, the house tidy, and me sitting in the living room as if nothing had happened. I didn't bring up the subject. I didn't throw in his face what I knew. Something told me to wait, to plan, to protect above all that little life growing inside me. In the days that followed, my health worsened considerably. My blood pressure rose to alarming levels. I had headaches that left me bedridden, swelling that deformed my feet and hands. Mrs. Ruth, seeing my condition, spoke the word I feared to hear. "It's preeclampsia, my child. Very dangerous for you and the baby. You'll need absolute rest until delivery, and may have to go to the hospital instead of having the baby at home as we planned." Hospital was a luxury I couldn't afford. Frank, when he heard the diagnosis, just shrugged and said, "Women are like that, get sick over nothing." Each day that passed, it became clearer that I was alone on this journey. Just me and my baby against the world. It was my family that saved me once again. My father and sisters took turns caring for me, brought ready-made food, washed my clothes, helped me bathe when I could barely stand. Frank seemed relieved not to have to deal with a sick wife, taking advantage of my family's presence to disappear even more. And so, between physical pain and wounds in the soul, I reached the 9th month of pregnancy. Large, heavy, swollen, but with a determination I didn't know I possessed. I had decided that, as soon as the baby was born and I regained my strength, I would leave. I would return to my father's house, restart my life, raise my child away from that man who had revealed himself to be so different from what he appeared to be. What I didn't know was that fate had much crueler plans for me. Plans that would forever transform my life, my soul, my view of the world. The worst was yet to come, and I, innocent, could never have imagined the horror that awaited me in that little house by the river on the day my son decided to come into the world. It was on a hot October afternoon that I felt the first contractions. Light at first, like a cramp that comes and goes. I was alone at home. Frank had left early, and, as was already customary, didn't say where he was going or when he would return. I tried not to panic. After all, Mrs. Ruth had explained to me that the first contractions of labor could last hours, even days for some women. I sent the neighbor's son to call my sister, Sarah. She arrived quickly, assessed my situation, and decided to stay with me until the process advanced further. "It's still the beginning, Betty. The baby won't be born right away. Let's wait a bit longer before calling the midwife." The hours passed. The sun began to set, painting the Portland sky with that orange that only those who live in the Pacific Northwest know. The contractions increased in intensity, but were still spaced out. Sarah prepared a cinnamon tea to warm the body and help with labor. When night fell completely, Frank appeared. He entered stumbling, smelling of whiskey and cheap women's perfume. Sarah frowned immediately, but I signaled for her to say nothing. I didn't want trouble, not at that important moment. "What's this woman doing here?" he asked, pointing to my sister. "I'm in labor, Frank," I replied calmly. "The baby will be born today or tomorrow." He seemed genuinely surprised, as if he had completely forgotten that I was due to give birth at any moment. He stood there, frozen, looking at my huge belly, as if seeing it for the first time. "I'm going to get more hot water," said Sarah, going out to the yard where the well was, but actually giving us some time alone. As soon as we were alone, Frank approached the bed where I was lying. His face had an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of anger and determination that caused me an immediate chill. "So the boy decided to be born today?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. "Yes," I replied, feeling a stronger contraction cross through me. "I think by morning he'll be here." Frank sat on the edge of the bed and just watched me in a way that made me instinctively shrink back. His eyes were different, as if something dark had taken hold of him. When he spoke again, his voice was just a whisper. "You know, Betty, I never wanted this child. Never wanted it." Those words hit me like a punch to the stomach. Even after all the signs, all the betrayal and abandonment, hearing that said so clearly destroyed me inside. "What are you saying, Frank? It's your son." "I don't care. I already have other plans now, a new life waiting for me." It was then that he confessed everything. How he met Marlene in the 2nd month of my pregnancy, how he fell in love with her, how they planned to run away together to Seattle as soon as they had enough money. He spoke without emotion, like someone talking about the weather or the price of flour at the market. "And you're going to leave me? With a newborn?" I asked, tears finally overcoming my resistance. "That's not my problem," he replied coldly. "You have family, your father, your sisters. Figure it out." I felt another contraction, stronger than the previous ones. I groaned in pain, but Frank didn't move to help me. He just sat there, staring at me with those eyes empty of any compassion. "Now Marlene is also expecting a child of mine." He dropped like someone throwing a bomb and waiting to see the explosion. 3 months already. A child I want, with a woman I truly chose. The pain I felt at that moment wasn't just physical. It was a pain in the soul, a wound that seemed to have no bottom. Between increasingly intense contractions, I tried to assimilate that devastating revelation. He was not only betraying me, but was going to build with another woman the family he promised me. "So that's why you started treating me like this? Because you found another woman?" He shrugged, as if the answer was too obvious to need saying. At that moment, I heard Sarah returning from the yard. Frank got up quickly. "I'm going out," he announced. I have things to take care of. Going out? But your wife is having a child, protested my sister, incredulous. That's women's business. You all figure it out. And he left, slamming the door hard. Sarah came running to my side, finding me in tears, both from the physical pain of contractions and the emotional pain of absolute rejection. What did that scoundrel say to you? She asked, holding my hand. Between sobs and groans of pain, I told her everything. About the other woman, about the other child that was on the way, about how he planned to abandon us. Sarah listened to everything in silence, her face hardening with each word. I'm going to call Dad, she decided. You can't stay alone with this man tonight. He's not normal. But I, in a mixture of wounded pride and foolish hope, asked her not to. No, Sarah. This is still my house. My husband still, as bad as he is. I want to have my child here, as I planned. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. Reluctantly, she agreed. She sent the neighbor's boy to fetch Mrs. Ruth, the midwife, and stayed with me as the contractions increased. The night advanced slowly like a raft against the tide. Mrs. Ruth arrived, examined me, and confirmed that the birth was progressing well, but would still take a few hours. First pregnancy is always more time-consuming, my child, she explained, preparing her tools. But everything is fine with the baby. It's in the right position, just needs to come down a little more. Around midnight, Sarah had to go home to check on her own children, whom she had left with a neighbor. She promised to return in less than an hour. Mrs. Ruth took the opportunity to rest a bit in the living room chair, since the birth seemed like it would only happen in the morning. I was left alone in the bedroom, swaying my body to relieve the pains that came in increasingly strong waves. That's when I heard the front door open. I thought it was Sarah returning, but the heavy step and strong smell of whiskey told me it was Frank. He entered the bedroom staggering more than before, bloodshot eyes, disheveled hair. Still haven't had that child? He asked, his voice slurred by drink. The baby will be born only in the morning, I replied, trying to stay calm. Go to sleep, Frank. You're drunk. He approached the bed, oscillating. His expression was a mask of anger and resentment that caused me instant fear. I tried to call for Mrs. Ruth, but my voice came out too weak to wake her in the living room. You know what I thought today? He said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. I thought that if this boy isn't born, I won't have to pay any child support. I can leave free. An alarm went off in my head. There was something in his voice, in his look, that went beyond the usual drunkenness. There was a dark intention that froze my blood. Frank, get out of here. Let me rest. The midwife is in the living room. My sister is already coming back. He laughed, a humorless laugh that sent chills down my spine. The old woman is sleeping like a rock, and your sister will take time. We have time. What happened in the minutes that followed is difficult to tell even after so many years. Like a cornered animal, Frank transformed into something I no longer recognized. He wasn't the man I fell in love with, wasn't even the distant husband of recent months. He was a creature dominated by a hatred I didn't understand, an evil that seemed to come from the depths. He grabbed me forcefully, covering my mouth so I wouldn't scream. His weight on my huge belly caused me sharp, immediate pain. I tried to fight, but between the contractions and my body weakened by the difficult pregnancy, I was too weak to resist. If this boy is born dead, no one will be able to blame me, he whispered in my ear as he pressed even harder on my belly. They'll say it was a complication of childbirth. It happens all the time. The terror I felt at that moment is indescribable. It wasn't just my life in danger, but that of my innocent child who hadn't even seen the world yet. I gathered all the strength I had left and managed to bite the hand that covered my mouth. I screamed as loud as I could. Frank, enraged, gave me a hard slap that made my vision darken. I felt a metallic taste of blood in my mouth. I heard hurried footsteps. Mrs. Ruth finally waking up with my scream. But before she reached the bedroom, Frank delivered a blow to my head that made me lose consciousness. Darkness enveloped me like a heavy cloak. The last thing I felt was an excruciating pain in my belly and the horrible sensation of something warm flowing between my legs. Then, nothing. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, I was in a different environment. White walls, smell of medicine, distant voices. I tried to move, but my body seemed to weigh tons. I tried to speak, but my throat was too dry to produce sounds. A nurse noticed I had woken up and approached the bed. "Easy, ma'am. You're in Portland General Hospital. Don't strain. You lost a lot of blood." Hospital? How had I gotten there? And my baby? I tried to ask, but only managed to emit a weak moan. The nurse seemed to understand my anguish. "I'll call the doctor. He'll explain everything." The minutes that followed were the longest of my life. Fragments of memory came back like painful flashes. Drunk Frank, the aggression, the acute pain, the blood. My heart accelerated so much I thought it would explode in my chest. Finally, a young doctor entered the room. He had deep, dark circles and a grave expression that told me everything before he even spoke. "Mrs. Betty," he began, his voice controlled and professional, "you suffered a severe placental abruption, probably caused by physical trauma. When you arrived here, you were in intense hemorrhage and had almost undetectable blood pressure." I made a superhuman effort to form the words I needed to say. "My baby?" The doctor lowered his eyes for an instant, and that simple gesture confirmed my worst nightmare. "I'm sorry. We couldn't save the child. It was a boy." The world collapsed on me at that instant. A pain that wasn't physical, though my whole body ached, pierced me like a lance. My son, my boy whom I already loved with every cell of my being, had departed without me being able to hold him in my arms, without me being able to see his little face, without me being able to tell him how much he was loved. The tears came, burning like acid. I cried until I had no more strength, until exhaustion took me back to the merciful darkness of unconsciousness. In the hours and days that followed, I gradually learned what had happened. It was Sarah who told me, sitting beside my hospital bed, holding my hand tightly as if afraid I would also slip away like my son had done. When she returned to the house that night, she found Mrs. Ruth desperate, trying to stop the blood that was gushing between my legs. Frank had disappeared. A neighbor, hearing the commotion, helped carry me to a wagon that brought me in a rush to the hospital. "And Frank?" I asked, my voice still weak. "Gone," replied Sarah, her eyes hard with hatred. "He took his things and disappeared. The police are looking, but so far nothing." At that moment, lying in that hospital bed, more dead than alive, something inside me changed forever. The love I once felt for Frank transformed into something dark and poisonous, a thirst for justice, or would it be revenge, that consumed me from within. "He killed my son," I whispered, tears drying in trails of salt on my face. "Killed our son, on purpose." Sarah squeezed my hand harder. "I know that, sister, and he will pay. Dad already went to the police station, told them everything. They're looking for him all over the city." But Frank had disappeared like smoke. He probably fled with that Marlene, as he already planned to do. He left behind a broken woman and a son who never got to breathe the air of the world. I stayed 2 weeks in the hospital. My body recovered slowly, but my soul seemed irreparably wounded. The doctor said I almost died, that it was a miracle I survived the hemorrhage. Miracle, they called it. I wondered what kind of miracle was this that left me alive while taking my son. When I finally received discharge, my father and sisters took me to my childhood home. They set up a room for me, took care of every detail, took turns to never leave me alone. But the loneliness I felt wasn't something their presence could cure. It was a deep emptiness, a black hole that seemed to suck all light and hope from my life. The nights were the worst. I would wake up screaming, dreaming of my baby I never got to cradle, seeing Frank's face contorted with hatred, feeling again the excruciating pain of that night. My father, already old but still strong, would sit beside my bed and hold my hand until I could go back to sleep. "It will pass, my daughter," he would say, his voice choked by the emotion that men of that generation rarely showed. "One day, this pain will be less." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that someday I would wake up without feeling that crushing weight on my chest, without seeing the imagined face of my son every time I closed my eyes. But in those first months, it seemed impossible. The police looked for Frank all over Portland, then expanded the search to neighboring cities. Nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him and this Marlene. Some said they had fled to Seattle, others to the East Coast, others still that they had crossed the border to Canada. Each new rumor brought a brief glimmer of hope that justice would be done, followed by the bitter disappointment when it proved to be just another unfounded rumor. Gradually, very slowly, I began to find a routine. I helped at home, went back to cooking the simple dishes I always liked to make, spent hours by the river just watching the water flow, carrying away pieces of my pain with each wave. It was on one of those afternoons by the Willamette River that I made a decision. I was sitting on a fallen log, watching the sunset paint the waters gold and red, when a sudden clarity hit me. I couldn't spend the rest of my life consumed by hatred and pain. My son wouldn't want that for his mother. Somehow, I needed to find a way to move forward, to transform that suffering into something that wouldn't completely destroy me. But how? How to overcome the deepest loss a woman can experience, aggravated by betrayal and violence? How to forgive the unforgivable? How to find meaning in a world that had become so dark and cruel? The answer would come from a place I least expected, and it would completely transform my life, giving me strength to not only survive, but eventually flourish again. Even with all the scars I would carry forever in my soul. The answer to my questions began to appear on a Sunday morning, 3 months after the tragedy. I was still living in my father's house, still waking up every night with nightmares, still carrying that pain that seemed endless. But on that day, something different happened. St. Sebastian's Church was a few blocks from our house. Since I was little, I went to Mass on Sundays, more by family tradition than by true faith. After losing my son, I stopped going. I couldn't understand how God would allow such cruelty. Didn't want to hear about divine mercy when there was no mercy in my heart, only a bitter desire for revenge. That morning, however, I woke up with an inexplicable desire to go to church. I didn't tell anyone, just dressed in silence and left before anyone could question me. The streets of Portland were quiet, the sun just beginning to warm the day. I walked slowly, feeling the river breeze on my face, hearing the birds sing, as if the world wasn't shattered. The church was almost empty when I entered. Just a few elderly ladies praying the rosary before Mass, the sacristan arranging objects on the altar, a girl placing flowers in the side vases. I sat in the last pew, hidden in the shadows, not knowing exactly why I had come or what I expected to find there. The Mass began, and I just observed, distant, as if watching a scene from a movie that didn't concern me. The priest was new to the parish, still young, with an accent that betrayed his origins in the Midwest. His words floated around me without really touching me, until he began the homily. "Today I want to talk about pain," he said, looking directly at the small congregation. "Not physical pain, which is transient, but that deep pain of the soul that seems to have no cure or end." It was as if he spoke directly to me, as if he could see through my dark clothes to the open wound I carried. "Many of us here know this pain," he continued. "The pain of loss, the pain of betrayal, the pain of destroyed dreams. And many ask, where is God in this pain? Why does he allow us to suffer like this?" I felt silent tears beginning to stream down my face. They were the same questions I asked every night, facing the ceiling of my room, never finding answers. "The hardest truth to accept is that sometimes there is no answer," said the priest, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes pain simply exists as a result of human choices, the imperfection of the world, the freedom we were given to do good or evil." He paused, now looking at a point above our heads, as if seeking the right words. "But there is an even greater truth. Pain doesn't have to define us forever. It marks us, yes. It transforms us, certainly. But it doesn't have to be the end of our story." Something in those simple words penetrated the armor of bitterness I had built around myself. It wasn't a sudden revelation, nor a miraculous cure for my suffering. It was just a small crack of light in a room that had remained in total darkness for months. When the Mass ended, I remained seated while everyone left. I didn't want to meet neighbors, answer questions, receive looks of pity. I just wanted to stay there, in the quietness of the empty church, trying to understand what had changed inside me. The priest must have noticed my hesitation. After everyone left, he approached the pew where I was, unhurriedly, giving me space to refuse his presence if I wanted. "May I sit?" he simply asked. I nodded wordlessly. "We haven't met yet," he said. "I'm Father Michael." I arrived in Portland just 2 months ago. I'm Betty, I replied, my voice hoarse from so much silence. You seem to be carrying a very heavy weight, Betty. I don't know what it was, whether the kindness in his voice, whether the fact that he was a stranger with no preconceived ideas about me, or simply because it was time for the words to come out. But I began to speak. I told everything, from dating Frank to the terrible night I lost my son. I spoke of my anger, my desire for revenge, the emptiness I felt where before there was only love and hope. Father Michael just listened, without interrupting, without judging, without offering religious platitudes or easy consolations. When I finished, exhausted and empty like a glass from which the last drop has been drunk, he remained silent for a long moment. Your pain is legitimate, Betty, he finally said. Your anger, too. I won't tell you to forgive what seems unforgivable, nor to find meaning where there seems to be none. His honesty surprised me. I expected the usual advice about forgiveness and acceptance of the divine will that so many well-intentioned people had already tried to offer me. What I will tell you is just this: you are not alone in your pain. And perhaps, just perhaps, by sharing it, it becomes a little lighter to carry. That's how, without planning or conscious intention, I began to attend St. Sebastian's Church again. Not out of recovered devotion or renewed faith, but from the simple human need for community, belonging, a place where I could exist without having to explain my sadness. On Sundays after Mass, I would sit with Father Michael for a few minutes. Sometimes we talked about my loss, other times about everyday simple things. He never pressed for spiritual progress, never demanded that I overcome my grief on a convenient schedule. He just offered presence and listening, gifts rarer and more valuable than I could imagine. It was through him that I met Mrs. Zuleika, a lady in her 70s who led a small prayer and charity group in the parish. Unlike many religious people I met in life, Mrs. Zuleika didn't talk much about God, but acted as if he were present in every gesture of kindness. Come help us on Thursday, she invited after a Mass, about 2 months after my first conversation with Father Michael. We're organizing food baskets for families in the flood area. My first instinct was to refuse. What could I, broken and bitter, offer to others? But something in the simplicity of the invitation, in the absence of pressure or expectations, made me accept. The following Thursday, I joined a small group of women in the parish hall. We organized donated food, separated clothes, packaged school supplies for children. I worked in silence most of the time, still uncomfortable with the idea of socializing, of pretending normalcy when nothing in me felt normal. But gradually, week after week, something began to change. It wasn't that my pain diminished. It was still there, deep and real. But I began to realize that there was room for other things besides it. Small moments of purpose when we managed to gather enough resources to help one more family. Brief instances of connection when another volunteer shared a story, a concern, a recipe. You have good hands for organizing, commented Mrs. Zuleika one day, observing how I methodically arranged the donations. You could help me with the records next time? So, without grand declarations or dramatic moments, I was slowly relearning to exist in the world. The tragedy defined me no less. But I began to realize that it didn't need to be the only thing that defined me. Meanwhile, life in Portland followed its course. The search for Frank cooled with time, as was to be expected. Occasionally rumors emerged. Someone who swore they saw him in Seattle or Chicago, or even in New York. Each new piece of information briefly reignited my thirst for justice, but soon the flame diminished in the face of the absence of concrete evidence. My father, concerned about my future, tried several times to introduce me to respectable men in the city. A widowed merchant, a public employee, a distant cousin who had recently returned to Portland. I refused all attempts with gentleness but firmness. The idea of trusting again, of opening my heart to the possibility of more pain, seemed impossible at that moment. You're still young, daughter, he insisted. You have your whole life ahead of you. I know that, Dad, I would reply. But I need to rebuild that life my way, in my time. And so I did. 1 year after losing my son, I got a job at the small municipal school in the neighborhood. Not as a teacher, I didn't have the training for that, but as an administrative assistant. I organized documents, attended to parents, took care of enrollments. A simple job, but one that gave me purpose and, more importantly, financial independence. I left my father's house and rented a room in the back of an elderly lady's house. It was small, but it was mine. A space where I could cry when I needed to, without worrying anyone, where I could have my things arranged my way, where I could begin to rebuild some sense of identity beyond the tragedy that had defined me. My work at the school put me in daily contact with children. At first, this was painful. Each little face reminded me of the son I never knew, of the future that was stolen from me. But gradually, those children began to heal something in me. Their energy, their curiosity, their ability to find joy in the simplest things, all of this was like a balm to my wounded soul. One girl in particular, Rosie, just 6 years old, daughter of a single mother who worked all day, began to seek me out during breaks. She would sit near my desk, draw, tell elaborate stories about princesses and dragons, sometimes just stay there in comfortable silence. "Why do you always look sad, miss?" she asked one day, with that frankness that only children possess. The question caught me off guard. I thought I was hiding my feelings well, maintaining a facade of normalcy. "Because I lost someone I loved very much," I replied simply, without going into details. She nodded with the seriousness of an old sage. "My mom, too. My dad left when I was a baby. She cries sometimes when she thinks I'm not watching." Something in that innocent observation hit me deeply. I wasn't the only one suffering. I wasn't the only one carrying the weight of abandonment, loss, shattered dreams. In each house, in each family, there were stories of pain. Some perhaps as heavy as mine, others different, but all real. Rosie became a constant presence in my daily life. I began to help her with lessons after school, waiting for her mother to arrive from work. Soon, other children joined us. Children of parents who worked until late, who had no one to stay with, who needed a little more attention than the crowded school could provide during regular hours. Without planning, I found myself creating a small tutoring group. The principal, seeing the benefit for the children, offered an empty room in the afternoon period. The parents, grateful to have a safe place to leave their children, began to contribute what they could. A dozen eggs, a fresh fish, some fruits from the backyard. I was so busy with my new purpose that I almost didn't notice when the second anniversary of my son's death arrived. The date still hurt, of course. I still spent the night awake, remembering every detail of that tragedy. But in the morning, when the sun rose, the children were waiting for me. They needed me. And I realized with surprise, needed them. It was on that day, while helping a boy form his first words, that I made a decision. I would become a teacher. It wouldn't be easy. I would have to study at night, work during the day, save every penny. But now, I had a goal. Something to direct my energy beyond pain and anger. I talked to Father Michael about my decision. He not only supported me, but helped me find information about night courses in Portland, about scholarships, about how to prepare for the admission exams. "You're transforming your pain into purpose," he said. "There is no more powerful cure than that." In the years that followed, my life found a new rhythm. I worked at the school during the day, studied at night, continued with my tutoring group in my spare time. It wasn't an easy life, but it had meaning, direction, purpose. The pain of loss never completely disappeared. How could it? But it became a part of my story, not all of it. From time to time, news about Frank still emerged. Someone who saw him in such a place, with such a person. Once, about 5 years after the tragedy, a Portland merchant returned from a trip to Seattle, swearing he had seen Frank working as a salesman in an appliance store. My father and brother-in-law went there to investigate, but when they arrived, the man who looked like him had already left the job. Each of these false hopes briefly reopened the wound, made me question if there would ever be justice. But gradually, the need for revenge lost strength. Not because what Frank did was less terrible, but because I realized that living consumed by hatred was allowing him to continue destroying my life, even from a distance. In 1978, 10 years after losing my son, I graduated as a teacher. It was one of the most important nights of my life. My father, already elderly but still strong, cried openly when I received my diploma. My sisters organized a small graduation party in the backyard of the house, with cake, soda, and the presence of people who had become important in my new life. Father Michael, Mrs. Zuleika, work colleagues, some parents and children from the tutoring group. That same night, the principal of the school where I worked offered me a position as a full-time teacher for the following year. Finally, I could be in the classroom officially, not just as an assistant or volunteer. The shy girl from Portland, who almost had her life completely destroyed by a man's cruelty, now became an educator, with the chance to positively influence the lives of dozens of children each year. "Your son would be proud," said Sarah as she hugged me at the party. It was the first time in years that someone directly mentioned my lost baby, and surprisingly, it didn't hurt as I expected. There was sadness, yes, but also a strange feeling of continuity, as if somehow he was still part of my story, of the person I was becoming. "I think so," I replied, allowing myself a small smile. "I think so." Life continued its course. I became known in Portland as Teacher Betty, especially dedicated to children with more difficulties, to those that other teachers sometimes gave up on. Perhaps because I myself knew what it was like to feel broken and abandoned, I had special patience with the little ones who carried their own invisible wounds. My father passed away in 1982, sleeping peacefully in his rocking chair, as he always said he wanted to go. I missed him terribly, but I had learned to live with loss in a way that didn't completely destroy me. His last words to me the night before were, "You made me proud, daughter, more than you can imagine." In the years that followed, Portland changed, America changed, I changed. The city grew, got more paved streets, electricity reached previously forgotten neighborhoods. The country went through economic and political crises and recoveries. And I continued teaching, continued seeking meaning in working with children, continued building a life that, if not exactly what I dreamed in my youth, had its own value and beauty. I never married again. Not for lack of opportunities. With time, good and decent men showed interest. But something in me couldn't take that step again. It wasn't just fear of betrayal or abandonment. It was as if that part of my life had been lived, closed, and now I was in a different chapter. I had my children at school, my friends from church, my sisters and nephews. It was a different family from the traditional one, but still a family. As for Frank, eventually the news ceased completely. No one else claimed to have seen him. No one brought rumors about his whereabouts. It was as if he had disappeared from the face of the earth, or at least from our region of the world. For many years, this bothered me deeply. The absence of justice, of closure, of answers to the questions that tormented me. Until one day, around 1995, when I was already 43 years old and more than 2 decades had passed since the tragedy, I received an unexpected visit at the school. It was a middle-aged man, well-dressed, with an accent that betrayed his origins in the south of the country. "Teacher Betty?" he asked, standing at the door of my empty classroom after the end of classes. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" He hesitated, visibly nervous, before continuing. "My name is Robert. I'm a private investigator. I was hired to find you." My heart raced in my chest. Could it be possible? After so much time? "Hired by whom?" I asked, my voice suddenly dry. "By a woman named Marlene. She died 3 months ago of cancer. But before passing, she asked me to find you and deliver this." He extended a yellowed envelope, slightly creased at the edges. I took it with trembling hands, unable to believe what was happening. "She told me to tell you just this. He paid for what he did, in ways you can't imagine. And she's sorry about your son." I was paralyzed, holding that envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode. Marlene, the woman for whom Frank abandoned me, for whom he killed our son, the woman who was pregnant with his child when he disappeared from my life. "Thank you," I finally managed to say. "May I ask, did she say anything about Frank?" The man shook his head. "Just that he died many years ago. She didn't go into details, and it wasn't my job to ask. She just promised to pay me well to find you and deliver this envelope, no matter how long it took." After he left, I sat alone in the classroom for a long time, looking at the sealed envelope, trying to gather courage to open it. What could it contain? Confessions? Explanations? Lies? After so many years, what difference would it make? Finally, with still trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter and a faded photograph. The photo showed a boy of about 3 or 4 years old, smiling at the camera with the same eyes as Frank. The letter said, "Betty, when you read this, I will have already departed. Maybe it's better this way. I don't deserve your forgiveness, nor am I asking for it. I just feel I need to tell the truth before I go." Frank told me everything that night. He arrived home drunk, hands dirty with blood, saying he had solved the problem. I was horrified when I understood what he had done. That same night, we fled Portland, not out of love, as you might have imagined, but because I was afraid of him, afraid of what he might do to me and the baby I was expecting if I threatened to report him. We hid in Seattle for a few years. He drank more and more, became increasingly violent. The son I gave him, Gabriel, in the photo, never received the father's love he deserved. Frank said the boy didn't look like him, that maybe he wasn't even his. In 1975, during a particularly violent fight, he fell down the stairs at home. He hit his head and died on the spot. I didn't cry for his death. How could I? He had become a monster, or perhaps he always had been. I raised Gabriel alone, telling him only that his father had died in an accident. He grew up, graduated, today lives in New York with his own family. He never knew what his father did to you, to your baby. Some truths are too heavy to carry. I know that nothing I say can repair what was done. I know that you probably hate me as much as him, and you have every right. I just wanted you to know that he didn't have a happy life after what he did, that he paid in many ways for his crime, and that not a day goes by without me thinking of the son you lost because of us. I don't ask for your forgiveness, just your understanding that I was also, in a way, a victim of the same man who destroyed your life. The difference is that I had the chance to see my son grow up, a blessing that you didn't have because of us. May God have mercy on us all, Marlene. When I finished reading, tears were flowing freely down my face. They weren't tears just of pain or anger, although those feelings were still there. They were tears of relief, of closure, of a cycle that was finally completing itself. Frank was dead, had been for decades. He didn't have the happy life I imagined with his new family, didn't completely escape the consequences of his actions, and Marlene had carried the weight of that night for as long as I had, in her own way. I looked at the photo of the boy, Gabriel. My son would have been almost the same age as him when the photo was taken. Would they have looked alike? Would they have had the same smile, the same gestures? Questions that would never have answers. I carefully folded the letter, kept it along with the photo in the envelope. I don't know how long I sat there, looking out the classroom window at the sunset over Portland, letting a strange and unexpected feeling invade me. Peace. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. It wasn't forgetting. That would be impossible. It was something more complex, more nuanced. The understanding that life rarely divides into absolute villains and perfect victims, that the tragedy that marked my existence was part of a broader web of pain, terrible choices, and consequences that affected many lives beyond mine. That night, I went home and, for the first time in many years, slept without dreaming of Frank, without waking up looking for my lost son. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had found its proper place in my story. A painful chapter, but not the entire book. What I didn't know then was that that letter, that unexpected closure, would be just the beginning of a new phase of my life. A phase where I would finally be ready to confront not just the past, but also fully embrace the future, with all the possibilities it still held for me. With Marlene's letter stored in a carved wooden box that my father had made years before, I felt a cycle closing in my life. Frank had been dead for decades. The woman he ran away with had also passed, and I finally had some kind of answer, even if it wasn't the justice I had imagined for so many years. I continued my life as a teacher in Portland, dedicating myself more and more to children with learning difficulties. The city was growing rapidly in the 90s, with the arrival of more companies, the expansion of the port, the increase in ecotourism. Portland was no longer that small riverside town of my youth, although the Willamette still ran majestically, meeting the Columbia in that spectacle of waters that always moved me. In 1997, at 45 years old, I received an invitation that would once again change the course of my life. The Municipal Education Department was implementing a special program for children in vulnerable situations. Boys and girls who lived in risk areas, many practically abandoned by their parents, some already involved in minor offenses. "We need a coordinator for this project," said the secretary, an energetic and idealistic woman who had recently taken office. "Someone with experience, with sensitivity, who knows how to deal with difficult children. Your name was the first that came to mind, Teacher Betty." I accepted the challenge without hesitation. It was exactly the kind of work that gave meaning to my existence, using my own experience of pain to help children who also carried deep wounds. The project started modestly, with an adapted room in a municipal school in the poorest neighborhood of the city, serving about 30 children in the after-school period. Our proposal was simple: offer not just academic reinforcement, but a safe space with food, cultural activities, and mainly emotional support. Many of those children had never heard a word of encouragement, had never been treated with the respect and dignity that every human being deserves. "You're different." A 12-year-old boy with visible signs of abuse and eyes that had seen more suffering than any child should told me one day. "You really look at us, as if we existed." Those simple words were engraved in my soul. That was exactly what I tried to do: see beyond the difficult behaviors, the dirty clothes, the rude words. See the child behind all the layers of pain and abandonment. The project grew quickly. In 2 years, we were serving more than 100 children in 3 different centers spread throughout the city. We secured partnerships with local companies, with the university, with international NGOs that operated in the region. We formed a dedicated team: teachers, psychologists, social workers, physical educators, all committed to the same vision of transformation through education and support. It was during this period that I met John Taylor, a gentleman of about 60 years who volunteered to teach woodworking to the older boys. He was a quiet man, of few words, hands calloused by decades of work with wood. A widower for many years, he had no children and lived alone in a simple house in the Riverside neighborhood. At first, our relationship was strictly professional. I coordinated the project. He came 3 times a week to give his woodworking classes. Gradually, however, we began to talk more about the children, about the city, about books we read, about life. John had a quiet wisdom, a way of seeing the world that intrigued and comforted me at the same time. "Life is like a river, Miss Betty," he said once as we had coffee after the end of the day's activities. "It has its rapids, its calm stretches, its unexpected turns. The secret is not trying to control the course of the water, but learning to navigate in it." That simple analogy, coming from a man who intimately knew the rivers of the Pacific Northwest, made a lot of sense to me. For so long I had fought against the current of my own history, trying to find answers, seeking a justice that never came in the form I imagined. Maybe it was time to simply let the river take me where I needed to go. Our friendship grew slowly, with the care of 2 people who had already known pain deeply and didn't want to risk suffering again. There was no romance, at least not at the beginning. We were just 2 loners finding comfort in each other's company, in easy conversation, in shared silence as we watched the sunset over the Willamette. In 1999, the project I coordinated received a National Education Award. I was invited to go to Washington, D.C. to represent our team at the awards ceremony. It was the first time I left Oregon, the first time I flew on a plane. At 47 years old, I felt simultaneously nervous and excited like a girl. "I'll go with you," offered John when I told him about the trip. "If you want company, of course. I know D.C., I can help you get around there." I accepted the offer, grateful not to have to face that adventure alone. It was during that week in Washington, away from the routine of Portland, away from the stories and memories that defined us in our city, that our relationship began to change. Walking through the National Mall, visiting the city parks, dining in simple but different restaurants from everything we knew, we allowed ourselves to be just a man and a woman enjoying each other's company. Not the project coordinator and the woodworking teacher, not the woman marked by tragedy and the lonely widower, just Betty and John. The night before we returned to Portland, sitting on a bench in the hotel park, He held my hand for the first time. A simple gesture, almost shy, but one that sent a shiver through my body that had long forgotten what it was like to be touched with affection. "I have something to tell you, Betty," he said, his voice more serious than usual, something I should have said a long time ago, but never found the courage. My heart accelerated, fearing what would come next. "So many years of disappointments taught me to always expect the worst. I've known you longer than you think," he continued. "I was in Portland back then. I knew your story. I knew who you were when I offered to work on the project." I withdrew my hand from his, confused and a little scared. "What do you mean by that, John? Why did you never tell me?" He took a deep breath, like someone finally preparing to release a weight carried for a long time. "I worked at the lumber mill, too. Not in the same department as Frank, but I knew him. I saw how he treated women, heard the stories he told when he thought no one important was listening. I was paralyzed, unable to fully process what I was hearing." John continued, his voice now lower, almost a whisper. "When I learned what happened to you, to your baby, that haunted me for years. I should have said something, should have warned someone about the kind of man he was. Maybe I could have prevented the tragedy." "You had no way of knowing what he would do," I automatically replied, still trying to assimilate that unexpected revelation. "No, I didn't," he agreed. "But still, I carry that guilt. And when I saw him in Seattle, years later, with that woman and their child, I felt so much anger, I almost did something crazy." This caught me completely by surprise. "You saw Frank in Seattle? When?" "In 1975. I was there for work, delivering a furniture order. I saw him at a fair, with the woman and a small boy. He recognized me too. I saw the fear in his eyes when we crossed paths." This coincided exactly with what Marlene's letter had revealed, that they were in Seattle at that time, that Frank died in 1975. "What happened after that?" I asked, now totally absorbed in the story. "Nothing. A few months later, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that he had died in a domestic accident. I didn't see the woman or child again. We sat in silence for long minutes, each lost in our own thoughts, processing that unexpected connection between our lives. "Why are you telling me this now, John?" I finally asked. He looked directly into my eyes with a raw honesty that completely disarmed me. "Because I realize my feelings for you go beyond friendship, and I cannot, should not move forward with this carrying this secret. You deserve to know everything before deciding if you want me to continue being part of your life." That night was long. We talked for hours, John telling me more about that time, about how he followed my story from afar, about how he always admired my strength to rebuild life after such tragedy. I told him about Marlene's letter, about the partial closure it brought me, about how I still sometimes dreamed of the son I never knew. When we returned to Portland the next day, something had changed between us. There was no resentment on my part. How could I blame him for something that happened decades ago when they barely knew each other? There was instead a new layer of connection, as if our histories were intertwined in ways we never imagined. Our relationship evolved slowly in the months that followed. Simple dinners at home, boat trips on the weekend, long conversations on the porch. At 47 years old, after so long alone, I was relearning to trust, to open my heart, to allow someone to enter my life again. "I'm not trying to replace what you lost," John told me one night, as we watched the stars from the backyard of my house. "I know there are parts of you that will always belong to that baby, to that young woman you were. I just want to be part of who you are now, of what you will still become." In 2001, after 2 years of relationship, we decided to live together. There was no formal marriage. We both felt we didn't need papers or ceremonies to validate what we had. We bought a small but cozy house in a quiet neighborhood with a view of the river and enough space for John to set up a small woodworking shop in the back. Our life together was simple and fulfilling. I continued coordinating the project, which now served more than 200 children and adolescents, and had become a national reference in education for vulnerable populations. John continued giving woodworking classes, besides producing beautiful pieces that he sold to craft stores and tourists. On Sundays, our house filled with people, my sisters and their now grown children, friends from the project, former students who returned to visit and tell of their achievements. John would cook a grilled salmon that was famous among our acquaintances. I would make my specialty, a blueberry pie that I had learned from my mother when I was still a girl. It was on one of these Sunday afternoons in 2003 that I received a visit that would once again change my perception of the past. We were all on the porch, enjoying the river breeze after lunch, when an unknown young woman appeared at the gate. She must have been about 25 years old, well-dressed, with a shy but determined manner. "Teacher Betty?" she asked, standing outside. "Yes, that's me," I replied, getting up to receive her. "How can I help you?" "My name is Gabriella," she said, her voice slightly trembling. I'm Gabrielle's daughter, Marlene's granddaughter." The world seemed to stop for an instant. I looked at that young woman with new eyes, now noticing familiar characteristics, the shape of the face, the hesitant smile. Could it be possible? The granddaughter of the woman Frank ran away with? The daughter of that boy in the faded photograph? "Please, come in," I managed to say, opening the gate with hands that suddenly seemed not to belong to me. I introduced her to everyone as a distant relative, feeling that this complex story shouldn't be exposed like that suddenly to our entire circle of friends and family. John, who knew the whole story, immediately understood who she was and discreetly began to distract the other guests while I took Gabriella to the living room, where we could talk with more privacy. "How did you find me?" I asked as soon as we were alone. "It wasn't easy," she replied, still nervous but more confident now. "My grandmother Marlene mentioned your name before she died, told part of the story to my father. He never wanted to look for you. I think it was too painful. But when he also passed away, last year, I found among his things a diary where he mentioned you, Portland, and this whole story. Gabriel had also died. The boy in the photo, now an adult man I never met, but who in some strange way was connected to my story, to my own lost son. I'm sorry for your loss," I said sincerely. "Thank you," she replied. "It was difficult. Cancer, like my grandmother. But I'm here because I felt I needed to meet you, to understand this part of my family's history that was always a great silence, a mystery." During the next 2 hours, I told Gabriella everything, from dating Frank to the tragedy, the long search for answers, Marlene's letter, my rebuilt life. She listened attentively, sometimes with tears in her eyes, sometimes asking delicate questions to clarify some point. "My father never knew everything," she said when I finished. "My grandmother protected him from the complete truth about the man who was his father. He grew up thinking Frank was just a weak man, a drunk who died in a stupid accident. He never knew what he did to you, to your baby. Maybe it was better that way," I replied. "What fault did he have? He was just an innocent child, like my own son would have been." Gabriella nodded, understanding. Then, hesitantly, she opened her purse and removed an envelope. "I brought some photos of my father as a child, teenager, adult. I thought maybe you'd want to see what he was like, how it could have been, in a way, for your own son." With trembling hands, I took the envelope. I didn't open it immediately. I wasn't sure if I could do that in front of her. "I also brought this," she continued, removing a small box from her purse. "My father was a doctor, a pediatrician. He dedicated his life to caring for children. He never knew why he chose that specialty. But now, knowing this story, I wonder if somehow he was trying to compensate, to balance what his father did. The idea that Frank's son had grown up to become a doctor who saved children hit me with unexpected force. What irony of fate. What strange and perfect circle of life. "He was a good man," continued Gabriella, her voice choked with emotion. "A loving father, a dedicated doctor. If this means something to you, Frank's lineage didn't continue his evil. My father broke that cycle. It meant something. It meant more than I could express at that moment, with the lump in my throat and the tears in my eyes. The idea that something good had emerged from all that tragedy, that good had somehow prevailed over evil, brought a comfort that I didn't know I still needed." Gabriella stayed at our house for 3 days. She got to know the project, saw the work we did with the children, got to know John better, and a bit of my current life. On the eve of her departure, I finally had the courage to open the envelope with the photos. Sitting on the porch, with the moon illuminating the Willamette, We looked together at the images of that man I never met, but who in some strange way was part of my story. Gabriel as a child, with the mischievous smile of the boy in the first photo. Gabriel as a teenager, serious in his school uniform. Gabriel as an adult, in a white coat, attending to children in a hospital. Gabriel as a father, holding newborn Gabriella with a look of pure love. "He would have liked you," Gabriella said softly. "He always taught us about the importance of doing good, of caring for the most vulnerable." That night, after Gabriella retired, I stayed on the porch with John. I told him about the photos, about Gabriel becoming a pediatrician, about the strange but comforting feeling that something good had emerged from so much suffering. "Life finds its ways," he said, holding my hand, "like a river that seems blocked by a fall, but always finds a way to continue forward." The next day, we said goodbye to Gabriella, with the promise to keep in touch. She returned to her life in New York, where she followed in her father's footsteps in medicine, but now carrying a more complete knowledge about her origins, about the complexities of family history. As for me, that unexpected encounter brought a new layer of healing. Seeing that the son of Frank and Marlene had become a good man, that he had dedicated his life to saving children, that he had raised a strong and sensitive daughter like Gabriella, all of this helped me make final peace with the past. It wasn't that the pain had completely disappeared. The loss of my son would always be a wound I would carry. But now there was also a deeper understanding of how our lives are intertwined in ways we cannot predict, of how even from the most terrible situations, seeds of good can sprout, of how the story never really ends with tragedy, but continues in new generations, in new beginnings. The following years brought their own joys and challenges. The project continued to grow, transforming the lives of hundreds of children. John and I grew old together, finding comfort and joy in each other's company. I maintained contact with Gabriella, who occasionally visited us in Portland and even came to work for a period as a volunteer in the project. In 2010, at 58 years old, I officially retired as a teacher, although I continued involved with the project as a consultant and mentor. John, already over 70, also reduced his activities, now dedicating himself only to special pieces ordered by old clients. Our life together entered a more tranquil, more contemplative phase. We traveled a bit. We saw the south of the country, visited New York to see Gabriella. We even made a trip to Europe, an old dream we finally realized. But we always returned to Portland, to our home by the Willamette, to the city that had witnessed so much of my history. It was during this period that I began to feel the need to share my experience more broadly. So many women still went through similar situations, abandoned during pregnancy, victims of violence, losing children in traumatic circumstances. Perhaps my story, with all its pain and also its redemption, could help others find strength to move forward. I began giving talks at schools, churches, community centers. It wasn't easy to relive those moments, to expose my deepest pain to strangers. But each time I saw in the eyes of a young mother that glimmer of recognition, that perception of, if she managed to survive this, perhaps I can too, I knew it was worth it. In 2015, at 63 years old, I published a small book with my story. It wasn't a national bestseller, of course, but it circulated well in Portland and neighboring cities, and earned me even more invitations for talks and conversations with women's groups. The project to which I dedicated so many years of my life now used my book as support material for mothers in vulnerable situations. John was my biggest supporter in this new phase. Even when his health began to decline in 2017, he insisted that I continue with the talks, with the support groups, with all the work that now gave a special meaning to my mature years. "You transformed your pain into purpose," he would say, on one of the many nights we spent on the porch, watching the river. "There is no greater gift you could give to the son you lost." Those words touched something deep in me. I had never thought of it that way. That all the work I did over the decades, all the children I helped, all the lives I touched in some way, were also a way to honor that baby I never got to know. That perhaps, in some mysterious way we don't fully understand, he would know, see, understand, that his brief existence had triggered so much good in the world. In 2019, John left us. After 2 years fighting against a cancer that slowly sapped his strength, He departed on a quiet May afternoon, holding my hand, surrounded by friends and family who loved him. His death was like he lived, serene, dignified, without fanfare. The grief for John was different from the grief for my son so many decades before. There wasn't the anger, the shock, the feeling of injustice. John lived a full life, was loved, departed, surrounded by affection. The sadness I felt, that I still feel, is tempered by gratitude for the 20 years we had together, for all the love and companionship we shared. Now, at 73 years old, I live alone in that same house by the Willamette. It's not a bitter solitude. It's a peaceful space where I relive memories, where I receive frequent visits from former students, from children who went through the project and today are adults with their own families, from my sisters and nephews, from Gabriella when she manages to come from New York. I still give occasional talks, still participate in support groups for women in vulnerable situations. Life has taught me that our story doesn't end with tragedy. It continues, transforms, finds new paths like the river that always follows its course, circumventing obstacles, creating new beds when necessary. And it's like this, looking at the Willamette from my porch, that I reflect on the long journey that brought me here, about the innocent young woman I once was, in love with a man who would reveal himself to be a monster, about the woman broken by loss and betrayal that almost consumed me, about the teacher who found purpose in helping vulnerable children, about the companion who rediscovered love in maturity, about the lady I now am, with white hair and wrinkles that tell stories of pain, yes, but also of resilience and, finally, of peace. The river runs, relentless and eternal. Life follows its course, and I, Betty, follow with it, carrying my memories, honoring my losses, celebrating each new dawn as the precious gift it is. When I look back at this journey of almost 8 decades in this world, I realize how faith became my safe harbor in the darkest moments. It wasn't a faith that appeared suddenly, like lightning illuminating the night. It was more like a small seed, planted on that Sunday when I entered St. Sebastian's Church, that grew slowly, sometimes almost imperceptibly, until it became a tree strong enough to shelter me in life's storms. After John departed in 2019, many people asked me how I managed to carry on. How, at 67 years old, after losing my companion of 2 decades, I still found strength to get up every morning, to continue with my talks, to smile at the children who came to visit me. The answer was always in the faith I built over these years. Not a blind faith that accepts suffering as divine will, but a mature faith that recognizes pain as part of the journey and seeks meaning even in the most difficult circumstances. In the months following John's departure, I found comfort in the routine we maintained together. I continued sitting on the porch every afternoon to watch the sunset over the Willamette, as we used to do. I continued caring for the plants he loved, talking to them as he did when he thought no one was listening. I continued going to the little church on Sundays, now no longer with him by my side, but carrying his presence in my heart. Father Michael, that same one who years ago had welcomed me when I returned to church after losing my son, was now a gentleman with completely white hair, close to retirement. He conducted the memorial service for John and continued to be a constant presence in my life after his departure. "You have a strength that inspires all of us," he told me one Sunday after Mass. "Do you know where that strength comes from, Miss Betty?" "From faith," I replied simply. "Yes, from faith," he agreed. "But not just faith in God, faith in life, in the human capacity to begin again, to find beauty even after the most devastating storm." His words touched something deep in me. It was true. My faith wasn't limited to the religious aspect. It was a broader, more comprehensive faith. Faith in purpose, in meaning, in the possibility of transforming pain into something constructive. In 2020, when the pandemic reached America, bringing fear and uncertainty to everyone, I felt that faith being tested again. Portland, like so many other cities, was hit hard. The forced isolation, the impossibility of receiving visits or continuing with my in-person talks, the constant concern for former students and their families living in precarious conditions. All of this weighed on my heart, already marked by so many losses. It was my niece Marianne, who introduced me to the technology that would change this phase of my life. One April afternoon, at the height of isolation, she appeared at my door, keeping a safe distance, of course, with an unexpected gift. "Aunt Betty, I brought a new smartphone for you," she announced, leaving the box on the porch bench. "We're going to teach you how to use it. That way you can see everyone through video calls, participate in groups, continue your work even without leaving home." I confess I laughed at the idea initially. Me, a 68-year-old lady, accustomed to paper notebooks and face-to-face conversations, learning to use advanced technology? It seemed unlikely, but Marianne, with the infinite patience she always had, insisted. She sat at a safe distance, at the other end of the porch, and guided me step by step. The first attempts were disastrous and comical. I pressed the wrong buttons, spoke too loudly, forgot to turn off the camera. But gradually, with the persistence of Marianne, and then other nephews who joined the classes, I began to master that device that had previously seemed so intimidating. And then a new world opened up. I could see Gabriella's face in New York, talk with former students who now lived in other cities, participate in virtual meetings of the project I helped found. More importantly, I could continue my talks, now in a virtual format, reaching women not just in Portland, but throughout the country. "You're an internet phenomenon, Aunt," exclaimed Marianne a few months later, showing me the viewing numbers of my online talks. "There are people from all over America watching, commenting, sharing your story." It was surprising and a little frightening. I never imagined that my personal experience, born on the banks of the Willamette so many decades ago, could resonate with people from such distant places, from such different realities. But pain is universal, as is the search for healing and meaning. And apparently, my journey of loss and reconstruction touched something deep in the hearts of many women. I began to receive messages, dozens, then hundreds of them. Women who had lost children, who had suffered domestic violence, who struggled to rebuild their lives after abusive relationships. All of them finding in my story not just consolation, but inspiration to move forward. When you tell how you transformed your pain into purpose, how you used your experience to help other people, it makes me believe that I too can do something meaningful with my suffering, wrote a young woman from Boston who had lost a baby in circumstances similar to mine. These messages gave me a renewed purpose each day. John was no longer physically by my side, but the work we started together, of welcoming, of healing, of transforming, continued alive and expanding in ways we never imagined. And today, we are here, my dears, living life as if every day were unique. Sitting on my porch in Portland, with the river running eternal in front of me, I feel a peace that took me decades to find. It's not a peace that denies pain or tries to pretend that losses don't matter. It's a deeper, truer peace. The peace of someone who has lived fully, loved intensely, lost painfully, and still chose with each new dawn to move forward with hope and purpose. My dears who have watched this far, I ask that you leave your like on this video and subscribe to each subscription. Each like helps me continue sharing stories like mine, reaching people who might need to hear that, yes, it is possible to survive the worst storms that life sends us. And if you'd like to continue participating in our $500 giveaway, remember to comment below with something about yourself, where you were born, where you live now, or a little fact about your life. I read every comment and love learning about all of you. Life is a river that never stops flowing, my dears, sometimes calm, sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward. And we, with our small canoes, navigate the best we can, helping other navigators when possible, accepting help when necessary, always keeping our eyes on the horizon where a new day always dawns, no matter how dark the night has been. A loving embrace from this grandmother who learned the hardest way that our greatest strength usually reveals itself precisely in the moments when we think we have no strength at all.